Hello everybody, in this video we're going to be going over Unit 4, talking about the strength of correlation between variables. Our learning objective is I can use data to describe the strength of the relationship between variables. Let's take a look at our problem here. In this problem, we took a look at a survey of 8 students. This was done to determine if there is a correlation between the variables hours studying, GPA, screen time, and height. We're going to interpret the scatter plots to determine if there is a positive, negative, or no correlation between the variables, and then determine if that correlation is weak, moderate, or strong. All right, so in our first scatter plot, we have the relationship between hours studying versus GPA. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to label my scatter plot here. I know that this is our hours studying. And we're going to see how that affects our GPA. And you notice our GPA goes from 0 up to 4, and our hours studying goes from 0 up to 8. All right, this is a sample set of 8 students, each represented by one of these dots here. For example, this student here studies for 1 hour, and they have a GPA of what looks like 1.5. All right, so how do we determine the strength of the correlation between variables? One way to do this is to make kind of like a circle around your data. So if you take, this is your data right here. One way to determine the strength and whether it's positive or negative is you can take all this data and just draw like a circle around all of it. Kind of like a cloud shape. Circle is kind of what it's called. Almost like kind of just trying to encompass all of this data. It kind of makes it a little more clear of what's going on. And what I can notice is that as the hours studying increases, the GPA is also increasing, and this is at a pretty strong rate. Notice how long and narrow this circle is. All this data is really represented well kind of in this kind of narrow sliver of data right here. So this is what's known as a positive relationship, because as hours studying increases, so does our GPA. So that is going to be a positive relationship. And then this is going to be a strong positive relationship because it's almost linear. You can almost draw like a straight line through this cloud. If this is our line of best fit, all of the points are pretty close to this line, right? All of the close points are really close to the line, meaning that this is pretty strong and a positive relationship. So I would take an estimation that this is strong and positive, meaning that the more hours you study means you're going to have a higher GPA, or the less hours you study, the lower your GPA will be. All right, let's take a look at hours studying versus screen time. So again, this is our hours studying, and this is our screen time. All right, so let's look at our data again. This one, it looks like it's kind of a straight line down, except there's one data point here. So what we need to do is kind of circle our data again. Make sure you encompass all of the data. And notice how this data set creates a little bit of a wider circle, if you will. So it's not quite as strong as this data set. Notice all of these points are very close to this line right here. Where if I draw a line of best fit to fit this data, something like this here, I have a little bit more of a space in between my data set and that line of best fit. Now, I would say that this is in a general direction, though, right? It is kind of going in this negative direction. So there is a negative correlation, but it's not as strong as this relationship over here. So I would call this one a moderate negative relationship. Negative. Negative because as hours studying increases, your screen time is going to decrease, right? So the hours studying, as you increase it, it is going to have a negative effect on your screen time, right? And that kind of makes sense. If you're spending more time studying, you're probably spending less time on some sort of screen. All right. Let's take a look at our last one. Our last relationship is hours studying versus height. So on this axis, we have our hours studying. How does hours studying affect your height? So let's take a look at this data set and see the points here of those 8 students. They all study a little bit differently, right? Some study more or less than others. And then height-wise, some are shorter or taller than others. If we circle this data set, let's put a nice circle around all this data here. We notice there isn't really a general direction, and there isn't really a strong line that we could draw through here, right? In our first case, we were able to draw a line like this, reflecting the relationship between hours studying and GPA. We were kind of able to draw a line in this direction. Wasn't as strong as this one, but we could still draw a general line that reflected this relationship. In this case, it's almost impossible to draw a line of best fit that fits this data, right? So this is what's called a weak or no relationship. So you could say this is a weak or no correlation. And that kind of makes sense. How much you study doesn't really have any effect on your height now, does it? It's not like short people are studying more than tall people. So it makes sense that there is no correlation between these two variables. In the other cases, it does make sense that there's a relationship between the variables. More hours studying should imply a higher GPA. More hours studying should imply less time on the screen. Not always. You can see some cases that it's not always the case, but more or less there is a moderate relationship between them. In this case, there is actually kind of, I would say, more like no correlation between your hours studying and whatever height you are. All right, that is basically it for this video. On the back side, you have more relationships. It's going to be the same study, but talk about different relationships between variables. All right, so go ahead and you can do that. And thank you very much.